Good day, everyone. Bonjour à tous. I am Ayabulela Dlakavu, the manager of the Twende Mbele program, a Pan-African partnership. Essentially, that is who we are as a Twende Mbele program, a partnership between African governments across East, West, and Southern Africa. And the constitutive governments of this partnership is the governments of the Republic of South Africa through the Department of Planning, Monitoring, and Evaluation. And in West Africa, we've got three governments, partner governments on the program. The first of which is Ghana, through the Office of the President, Monitoring and Evaluation Secretariat, and then the National Development Planning Commission. Then we've got the Republic of Benin through the Ministry of Development and Coordination of Government Action. And then the last country we have in West Africa is essentially the government of the Republic of Niger through the High Commission for the Modernization of the State. And then in East Africa, we've got the government of the Republic of Kenya through the Monitoring, Evaluation, Learning, and Public Investment Management Directorate in National Treasury and Economic Planning. And then the last but not least of our countries is the government of the Republic of Uganda through the Office of the Prime Minister. So these are the partner governments on the program, and the overarching aim essentially of this partnership of African governments is to mutually build and learn and share on best practices on how to manage the performance of public policies vis-a-vis development outcomes to ensure a better life for the citizens of these countries through essentially advocating for the generation of performance evidence. For example, our policies as South Africa are performing, under what conditions are those policies performing, how to amplify those implementation successes of these policies or programs or plans, and where there are challenges in terms of performance, how can we course correct in terms of maybe the design or the implementation, or even the changing of an entire intervention based on having learned from an evaluation or an assessment or a review. Having learned that maybe that intervention is not well designed for that particular purpose, you sought to ameliorate vis-a-vis communities. So that's the beauty of monitoring and evaluation, that you learn those lessons about your intervention and whether or not it's fit for purpose, it's being implemented as planned, and how it can perform better. So these governments are all about sharing good practices first and foremost on public policy evaluation. But most importantly, because I think 70% of the time, most of our governments spend a lot of time in terms of performance monitoring, monitoring the implementation of programs, and of course, maybe the other 30%, which is a normative goal, but the other 30% of the time, maybe they've got the resources and there's a commissioning of an evaluation to check either maybe an impact evaluation or an outcome evaluation to check whether policies are achieving the desired outcomes vis-a-vis that particular societal problem or challenge they wanted to address, or maybe you commission an evaluation to track the design of an intervention and whether or not it's fit for purpose for that environment within which it will be implemented. So the program has enabled various platforms for these governments to essentially learn and share about best practices. And I think to speak about some of the value or some of the lessons that have been learned, I think the flagship pioneering invention in one of our countries that has been sort of exported to the other countries and adapted, of course, to the respective conditions. I think it was the Management Performance Assessment Tool that was coined by the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation in South Africa. And it's essentially a management tool that seeks to assess where essentially public institutions introspect and essentially interrogate management practices that they engage in, which are key to the optimal performance of the entire organization. So it looks at your planning systems and whether they are fit for purpose, your human resources, whether you've got the human capacity to sort of discharge or execute the goals you want to achieve, looking at your performance monitoring and evaluation systems and the extent to which they are internalized by organizations or units within an organization to sort of pursue the goals they wish to achieve. And of course, the prudent financial management, of course, is another part of that management performance tool. And I think that particular management performance tool was adapted by countries such as Ghana, by countries such as Benin, of course, adding a local flavor, and based on the governance or public administration environments within which they are in, and the unique, of course, bureaucracies they find themselves in. So that's the major one of the major lessons or kind of innovations in public management designed to sort of improve policy performance that has been adapted, first shared by South Africa, adapted by the other countries, and then feedback was given as to whether or not the public services or public administrations in those countries are receiving that particular invention. And then, of course, over time, especially close to or just before the COVID environment, there was this discourse in the practice about rapid evaluations, and this essentially came out of the realization by the countries within Twende and, of course, the broader environment of the evaluation space, that maybe traditional evaluations are not the most feasible to do for our countries, especially because African countries are not immune to the squeezing of the public purse because of sluggish growth, economic growth. If you look at the figures from the 2014s up until now, you don't see those revered growths of yesteryear, maybe in the early 2000s, where countries could grow at 6% per annum. And of course, as the economy grows, it means you're opening more companies, there's more economic activity, and therefore the government can tax more companies, more individuals are employed, so you can get more personal tax, which adds to the public purse, and therefore you can spend on socio-economic policies and programs. Nowadays, unfortunately, even a 1.2% growth per annum is something that can be celebrated given the environment we come from. Essentially, the outspurt or the fallout since the 2008 global financial crisis and the reluctance of global capital to invest based on the recovery or slow recovery period since then. And of course, then we were plunged into a global health pandemic, which had major economic repercussions. So this is where now the importance of using what you have optimally came from. And of course, performance monitoring and evaluation are those functions that enable you to make best use of the small resources that you have. And the countries came up with this thing of piloting rapid evaluations on priority programs of their governments at the time. So the DPME adopted a rapid evaluation guideline, and the other countries also did the same. So you had a number of government programs, for instance, the government to business incentive scheme in South Africa. Niger has done a number of very worthwhile, and I'm hearing this from the feedback of our policymaker in Niger, who's our partner on the program, and the current chairperson, Mr. Omar Saleh, where they commissioned 2 rapid evaluations, essentially on free maternal and healthcare policy. And essentially they commissioned that rapid evaluation to inform cabinet decision-making processes on whether or not, first of all, that free maternal and healthcare policy was known by the intended beneficiaries, and where it was known, what is the rate of uptake of that particular intervention. Number 3, what has been the successes of that policy with regards to improving maternal health and avoiding a situation where women are not able to sort of carry their pregnancies to term successfully and give birth. So curbing maternal mortality. And of course, the other important part of that, after maternity, whether children aged 0 to 5 years are taking up that free healthcare policy, getting free access to child health care, and whether or not it's improving, number 1, their health, and number 2, their growth, essentially, because health also improves. When you've got good health, it means you are developing as a child easily, so your faculties of mind and so on. So that was a key rapid evaluation, not just for government to make an informed decision, but also it's essentially a policy discussion that had major ramifications in terms of the population of Niger, especially the marginalized. If you look at women and children on this continent and maybe elsewhere in the global south. Uganda also did the same rapid evaluation on I think, empowerment scheme for local communities who have game reserves or game parks and so on. because there was a remuneration scheme whereby 20% of the gate fees were supposed to go and be invested back into communities. So it's another invention or adaptation of a rapid evaluation guideline, where Twende Mbele as a program adopts a common position to say, let's go and do rapid evaluations, which generate evidence and use that evidence to inform policy decisions in our countries that have major ramifications for social development, number one, and even local economic development in the case of Uganda. South Africa did their rapid evaluation, of course, on a government incentive scheme for business, and we all know that businesses have a primary vocation of creating jobs. So that's the importance of rapid evaluations. And then, of course, with any maturation of national evaluation systems, essentially systems that are designed to generate evidence to inform policy decisions or inform the redesign or planning of development or social change, when you're planning for social change to improve the lives of citizens. There came a point where I think the field and even the Twende Mbele countries started to interrogate the central question of whether these monitoring and evaluation systems that they've been setting up since the late 2000s. And the central question was that we've been setting up, creating guidelines, formulating policies that are adopted by cabinet that are supposed to now be implemented by many of these government institutions across sectors. The central question was, after investing so much in infrastructure for building an M&E system, to what extent are these systems, number one, generating evidence to inform the policy cycle, whether it's policy making or agenda setting the agenda for development in terms of where should we drive change, and then policy formulation, policy implementation, as well as future planning, because the policy cycle is quite continuous and each step is iterative. Monitoring and evaluation helps you to go and interrogate the design of an intervention, while it can also help you to course correct in implementation or amplify successes in implementation, and also helps you to be futuristic in thinking. And I think that's one of the things we underrate with regards to monitoring and evaluation, that they have forecasting elements, because through monitoring or evaluation you can pick up trends in terms of the design or even implementation of development interventions, which you can then forecast into future planning to say, these are the pitfalls we need to avoid in the wider macro environment, the political environment, the physical environment, the legislative environment, social environment, and so on. Because everything, governance is one of those things, or policymaking or development itself is not one of those things that happens in a science lab where you think if you put in the right chemicals, this is what will come out. It doesn't happen that way. So M&E, or monitoring and evaluation, evidence generation and use, happens within a particular time and space, not in a vacuum, where we always make the assumption that if Twende Mbele sponsors a rapid evaluation, automatically that rapid evaluation will be used. No, Twende Mbele is instrumental in the co-commissioning and carrying out the rapid evaluation to the T up until its completion. But I think the other vital part of that rapid evaluation starts now in the post-rapid evaluation process, where you take up those findings and disseminate them to the policymakers, which is essentially your target market, and what that target market does with that evidence. And that is where I think the genuine value of M&E comes in, when it is sent to the audience it was intended for, and what they do with that evidence. And of course, we emigrated now to those difficult discussions of saying, let's start to make inroads in terms of generating monitoring evidence or evaluative studies for the purposes of informing planning. And most importantly, I think one of the blind spots of the evidence space, generating evidence for resource allocation, essentially budgeting. Because everything in governance, whether it's in government itself or even in development in the non-governmental space, everything is dependent on resources. So you can have all the grand plans, but if you don't have adequate resourcing of those plans, I think you will find that they will remain that a plan and not come into fruition or help you achieve those desired outcomes, because we all plan to get to a desired state of affairs. And so resourcing comes in very handy. It's actually a central determinant of success when you want to drive social transformation. So we embarked on an evidence generation process across our countries, where we try to understand whether or not the investment in these national evaluation systems is starting to bear fruit in the sense that where are these monitoring reports now being used? Are monitoring reports used in the planning cycle, whether it's the medium-term planning cycle, let's say over a 5-year government period? Because most democracies have that thing where governance is tied to a 5-year or 4-year period. Ghana has a 4-year period, South Africa has a 5-year period, Uganda has a 5-year period. Where is monitoring being used in the medium-term planning cycle? And most importantly, when that 5-year plan is adopted and is now cascaded or operationalized through annual plans, is monitoring either quarterly or biannually or annually, is monitoring evidence being used when decision makers and an entire organization comes through into a reflective session to say, over the past 12 months, this is what we have achieved and this is where we need to go, such that, because planning goes with budgeting. Once you've done a reflection on the current annual plan and you are planning for 2025, somewhere you are supposed to say, based on these monitoring trends over 4 quarters, we found that we didn't achieve our desired indicators or objectives in quarter 1 and 2. And we found that through monitoring, it was actually a case of limited resources. So how do we then go and reprioritize our budget to sort of cover those deficiencies, such that next year in 2025, we don't do the same things and expect a different result, but rather we invest so that we see whether that intervention or that particular objective will be met with better resourcing. And here we're not talking about revolutionary change in terms of budgeting. We are saying that maybe a 2% increase in the budget allocation, for instance, in terms of you going to build pipes in a rural area, you're able to, let's say, bring 20 households into a common pipeline where they can actually get borehole water. It doesn't always mean that you need to go and find $100 million. Maybe it's a case that you missed the outcome you wanted to achieve by just a splinter or a mere 1% of the budget, and that's how you fell short. So trying to find monitoring and evaluation evidence use in the budget formulation cycle, be it at the beginning when there are budget framework papers, when Ministry of Finance or National Treasury says, okay, departments, please come with your plans and attach resources to those plans so that we consider all these submissions and then come up with one harmonized government budget for the 2025-2026 financial year. So that's what we've been trying to do when we've been advocating for the use of monitoring and evaluation evidence in budgeting. But we've sort of realized as a program in those scientific studies or applied studies that we got feedback, of course, from finance people who are involved in the budget cycle, to say most of the evidence you guys are generating as monitoring or evaluation experts or technical officials in government, it doesn't speak to us because we are quantitatively inclined kind of people. So you coming with your narrative reports doesn't do much to us because we deal with numbers. So that forces you as a discipline or as a cadre of practitioners in monitoring and evaluation to go and introspect and say, the monitoring reports we produce, should they not also include some sort of expenditure tracking or even financial monitoring? See, now you start to be attractive to the finance people. Same with evaluations. Let's not just commission qualitatively biased impact evaluations or process or implementation evaluations. Why don't we go and infuse a bit of mixed methodology such that we also have a bit of quantitative data that speaks to finance people, just like the way statisticians have been able to make inroads into the finance field, because statisticians deal with numbers. And that's why most of the time when the Ministry of Finance or National Treasury goes into the budget cycle, they'll always want administrative data or statistical data from the National Statistics Office or Statistics South Africa and so on, because they deal with numbers, and finance people naturally gravitate towards quantitative kind of statistics, numbers and the like. So that has given us an opportunity then to say, let's start to build champions of monitoring and evaluation amongst finance people, because M&E is not the small kind of pond that we've sort of allowed ourselves to be limited to. Once you start bringing finance people into the M&E, because M&E is quite a transversal discipline, an engineer can be a monitoring and evaluation practitioner. A water services specialist can be a monitoring and evaluation practitioner, because it's not just about planning, but it's also about implementation and using monitoring to sort of see whether these things we're implementing are leading to the right type of outputs or are meeting the objectives you wanted to meet in the first place. So that's what we are trying now to do in the Twende Mbele countries, to say, if we've got a workshop on capacity building, let's not just work with the ministries who coordinate the national monitoring and evaluation system. Let's try and bring in sectors. Let's bring in people from the Ministry of Education into our programs. Let's bring in people from finance, from the Ministry of Finance or Treasury, into our programs, and have those people, or position those people as champions of M&E evidence generation, M&E evidence demand, so that we don't we don't become too rigid in terms of always speaking to a small pond, and we have the same people in workshops. And Kenya, of course, is very important for us, because that's one government where we work through the National Treasury, or what would be called Ministry of Finance in other countries. So Kenya is going to be quite important in bringing to us economists, people in the budget cycle, whether it's people who issue budget framework papers or people who aggregate all the annual plans or costed annual plans of these ministries, so that they are always having a keen eye on what monitoring and evaluation evidence is showing in terms of patterns, performance patterns across a given year, and also advising those ministries to say, okay, budget allocation for you will be increased for this year based on these monitoring reports you submitted to National Treasury, and so on, so that M&E becomes now a transversal kind of discipline beyond us just thinking about it, but now we need to start playing into those fields where we bring more and more people, not just in finance, by the way. Ghana is an interesting case now where the senior technical advisor to the monitoring and evaluation secretariat coordinator was involved actually in setting up a results framework for a political party manifesto heading into the 7th December 2024 election. And this is what we should not be shy about, because in governance, you can't say, oh no, M&E is not a political endeavor. Of course, it's a political endeavor, because policies, by their very nature, established by government, which is a political institution. And it's a political institution because it's governed by political legislation and so on, because parliament legislation comes from politicians, not from citizens, and so on and so forth. So we can't be shy. And that's where you need to convert people, even from the political side of things, because those ministers will always want to read our reports. They are deployed by a political party. So how can you say we are scared because we are going to be politicized? M&E and development and how people experience the world is political by nature. That's why most people, even feminists, will tell you, black consciousness kind of ideologists will tell you that the personal is political. So we can't then try and be this noble profession that shies away from certain audiences and not in others. So let's not be one-dimensional. And that's what we're trying to do with that work on M&E planning and budgeting. And now what I've picked up in terms of what Twende Mbele needs to do differently. And it's based on, again, this work we do and the action research we've been doing. I think one of the glaring challenges or missed opportunities is the work with parliaments, because we're talking about, spreading the M&E gospel to different audiences, finance and so on. But in that process, I think we've sort of neglected legislature somewhat as a program. And this is symptomatic, again, of the entire field in monitoring and evaluation, based on cost implications. But saying that engaging legislatures is expensive is not enough by itself. We need to devise ways to enter into partnerships with like-minded organizations like us. Twende Mbele is in an African continent where there's clear Francophone Africa, clear Anglophone Africa, Afrobarometer, and so on. Even the independent evaluation unit at the African Development Bank, which is our technical partner, just like the Clear Center for Anglophone Africa. Why don't we partner with them to essentially tune out interventions that are meant to build the evaluation capacities of members of parliament, parliamentary staff, and administrators in parliament? And it's not really expensive when you spread the financial cost across 2 or 3 other organizations, especially because we already have the African Parliamentarians Network on Development Evaluation. They've already organized they are already organized umbrella body for parliamentarians who take a keen interest in evaluation capacity building, in evaluation evidence for parliamentary oversight when looking at executive or government performance. Let's go and work with those parliamentarians, invest money just like UpNode is investing money we pool resources, we build capacities of parliamentarians, so that this work we are doing with governments is also supplemented by some good work we're doing with legislatures. And there you've got essentially two centers of state power that you are influencing to sort of build an evaluation culture in both, so that parliamentary oversight is based on demanding performance monitoring data on a quarterly basis from the executive. Parliament has portfolio committees that are empowered by the Constitution legally to demand such evidence from executive institutions or government institutions across sectors. Why don't we go and use that leverage, empower these parliamentarians to go and demand this monitoring evidence? Parliamentary portfolio committees can even commission or recommend the commissioning of evaluations if they pick up certain concerning performance patterns over a given year, to say, no, these interventions we've set with you as a Ministry of Energy or Ministry of Health for four consecutive meetings, and performance is not improving. We therefore recommend that you go and commission an evaluation as to what exactly is wrong with this program. Maybe it's the design, or maybe it's the implementation, maybe the Department of Health or Ministry of Health does not have capacity. Let's commission an evaluation to get to the root of the problem. And there you have a legislative arm of government, or legislative arm of the state that has that power. And so we can leverage that constitutional power as an evaluation capacity development and partnership institution as Twende Mbele, working with other partners and so on. I think the other thing we could do better as a program, I think the team discusses this every so often, because the Secretariat of Twende Mbele is based in South Africa at the University of the Witwatersrand. I think it's quite important for us now to start really walking the talk in terms of our management committee meetings or strategic planning sessions. Let's move them away from South Africa. Maybe let's say biennially it moves from South Africa to Kenya, then from Kenya it goes to Ghana. Or we can devise a mechanism where we say, if we plan in 2024 in South Africa, then we go to another sub-region the next year. We can even disaggregate the planning system to say, if it's in an Anglophone or English-speaking country this year, we can send it to a French-speaking country the next year. And that's how you build, that camaraderie and fraternity, a genuine brotherhood amongst these countries. Because it's not just about the intention of building public sector monitoring and evaluation systems, but it's also building or breaking down those colonial barriers between English-speaking countries and French-speaking countries, and really, trying to bring about some sort of Pan-African unity within this small enclave of 6 countries. Of course, the other thing we need to do differently, which we've started to sort of course correct, is that we need to sort of expand the program. We've started, of course, now engaging what we call Tier 2 countries, or Twende Mbele Plus, into the program. We started inviting in, for instance, countries like Malawi, countries like Namibia have started coming into our work plan, where we've got learning activities, advocacy events, conferencing, for instance, and so on, which are important learning opportunities for our governments. And this is what we want to do. We don't want conferences to be overly academic endeavors or spaces where it's only the preserve of professors and so on. Government by itself is a learning institution and also is a knowledge hub or a knowledge center, because governments have been in the endeavor of bringing about whole of society change for a long time, and there are certain lessons even us as researchers we can pick up when they speak in conferences, so that it becomes a research area for you, and we start doing more applied research that actually helps our governments to also improve, rather than always complaining and saying government is not doing this, government is not doing that. Let's sometimes also get into that groove of doing policy-centered research, so that we criticize but also provide targeted interventions or recommendations for our governments to consider. And that's what we're trying to do, grow the program. And I know the Secretariat is quite busy with the management committee now. These other countries, for instance, in East Africa, we're looking at the United Republic of Tanzania to join the program. We're looking at Malawi, we're looking at Namibia. In West Africa, we're looking at Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal. Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal. And of course, we're looking at Sierra Leone as well. So this is what we want to do, not just to grow that depth discussion we always speak about, to go and infiltrate deep into the ministries, other ministries of government, but we also want to sort of broaden our horizons as a program so that this message reaches as many African countries as possible. Of course, that will need to go with our intensive kind of resource mobilization efforts, so that now that we're sitting on 6 out of 55 African countries in 3 years or so, we're speaking about, let's say, 9 or 10 out of the 55 African nation states that exist. And who knows, after 5 to 10 years, the program can be on 15 out of 55. And this is a challenge, I think, that Twende Mbele is more than capable of doing. It's not just about adopting these countries as core members, but also as associate members as well, who also benefit from the resources that we get so kindly from our donors, such as the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation in America, and many others who help, who see value in the work that we do. So yeah, that's the program.